Welcome to the Surfcast Podcast, your weekly source for surf fishing discussions, tactics, interviews, news, and more. The Surfcast Podcast is hosted by Jerry Audet and Toby Lapinski, two of the most dedicated and obsessed surf fishermen that you will ever meet. The tide is up, the wind is at our back, so let's hit the surf.
It's going to be 55 degrees again on Saturday. I can't believe it. It's like this winter's never going to happen, I guess. And, you know, we had all that snow. I mean, I got a foot of snow. I mean, we really had a foot. And then now it's going to be 55 degrees again. And we had 50 degrees the other day. The other morning, it warmed up to 52 degrees by 5 a.m. I mean, I don't understand. And here we are again. We're going to get tons of rain and wind. And my wife's filling up buckets. We're checking the generators.
Yeah, it's wacky. Like the wind, the rain, the surf, it's just all coming together. And it's not cold, like you said. Like I don't need a crazy cold winter, but I always look forward to a little bit of cold. Like I need a little. I need, each season has to exist in some form for at least a short amount of time, and it has not hit yet.
Yeah, I mean, and it's good for the environment in terms of like signaling all the creatures to start doing all the things that they need to do, which ultimately affects our fishing and like rolling into the season and making sure that everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. I mean, because trust me, if it's going to be 50 degrees in the winter, I'm in, personally, but I know that, for the trout, for example, or something like that, we got to have a winter.
The birds are screwed up. I was out walking the dog yesterday afternoon, and there was a flock of robins in my yard. There must have been 24 robins. I'm like, you guys are in trouble if it gets cold right now, because I don't think you're supposed to be around here right now.
That's funny. Yeah, it's been very weird. It's been very weird.
Yeah, welcome to the Surfcast Podcast. And honestly, this is the right topic to be talking about today here. Weather and storms and this wackiness that we're seeing right now, even if it isn't traditional January weather as the time we're recording this, it's the right flavor for the subject of the day.
Yeah, and the subject of the day is metal lips in rough water. Something that I think a lot of guys, a lot of anglers, I should say, are afraid of. It's not a very popular subject, and it's something that sort of a lot of times gets poo-pooed and says, don't use metal lips in the rough stuff. And I think that ultimately comes from everyone assuming a metal lip is a Danny. So, Toby, you go ahead and kick it off, get it started. What the hell do you think about metal, big chunks of wood, big waves?
Well, I think your reference to people assuming metal lip and Danny, surface Danny's perfect, because as I was kind of thinking about what I was going to say today, I was thinking about just that. I'm like, dude, you don't throw like surface Danny's in the big surf, but you throw certain ones, which I'll get to in a minute. So like, where did you make that change? When did you start doing it? And I can reference it right back to, I don't know the exact year. I know it was around late 90s, 2000 range when we had a couple of successive falls with hurricanes. And, I was really into surf fishing, like developing some of those early, the excitement about it. And
really the beginner's mind, the fun stuff. Yeah.
Not the like jaded old man I am now.
Yeah. It's the best. It's the best thing that you can't ever capture again in the surf. Yeah.
I wish I still had that in me. I was like, think about where did I start throwing metal lips in the big surf? And I remember like a specific, we're not going to talk about like specific locations and things like that, but I remember this one big hurricane, and I didn't have a chance to verify which one it was, but again, it was around 2000. And I was at a prominent lighthouse, let's just call it. And I was throwing metal lips, a specific metal lip. It was me, it was my buddy Chris, it was Rich, a couple of the guys were all throwing metal lips, and it was the Gibbs trolling swimmer, the GTS 3. The old school, the slender lip. For whatever reason, we had to have the slender lip, not the bigger Danny lip they run now, but that older, skinnier lip, and it's got the swivel on the front, and that thing, it dug in the big surf. It held up in the waves. You could cast it. And like that was the first metal lip I threw in the surf. And it is not a surface swimmer. I mean, its name is the trolling swimmer. So it was designed to be dragged behind a boat and deal with like, similar-ish conditions to what you're dealing with in a big surf. And we used to hammer bass on that thing. And I mean, I don't own one now. I've got different things that have fallen into place, but it was kind of cool. Like I think it was yesterday, like when I just had that, that's where the change came. When you realized a metal lip wasn't just the 6-inch surface Danny that, waddles on top. There's other aspects to it, and they can work really well in these type of scenarios.
Yeah, so you said something that's interesting I want to follow up on. So you said, dragging it behind a boat is very similar to what we might be dealing with in a big surf, and I think that might be a little bit confusing for somebody listening to this. What do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean, but can you clarify what you mean by that?
Comparing the difference of let's picture calm surf, not a lot of current, no wave action, so that's your not behind the boat, whereas behind the boat you have current. You've got the
right.
the speed of the boat moving along. Perhaps it's going through a rip, so there's just extenuating influences working on that lure, and it has to still remain true, swim upright, look natural, not roll over, flip out, spin.
That's right.
And at that stage of my development mentally with the surf fishing and the plugs I was using, that trolling swimmer perfectly fit the bill, which it actually came over from fishing the breachways and the outflows, which is just like dragging a plug behind a boat where you're pulling a lure against that hard current. And I was actually kind of think about it was funny. I'm like, I don't know if I own any now of those the GTS 3s. Like I said from a couple in my vintage collection. I know I sold some of them off because I progressed to different plugs that work just as well. We're the new fad, so stuff comes and goes in and out of rotation. And I have a couple I think even work better now in that big nasty surf than the GTS was doing at that time, but they weren't available.
Yeah, I had one at one point. It was blue over white, and it had the swivel on the front, the whole 9 yards, and I think I sold it in a lot of stuff on SOL at some point. When I used to do that, and I haven't been on there. I haven't sold anything. I haven't even been on there for years, but let alone sell anything. But yeah, I think I had one. I think you made the point, and that's that when you're thinking about metal lips in a big surf, you have to think, in my opinion, stability. And that's what the beauty of the Danny on the calm conditions is. It's not stable. It's really roly-poly. It's constantly rolling and wiggling. And that's the other thing. A lot of anglers, I think, view the Danny as wiggling, but it's rolling too, right? It has a substantial roll to it. And especially anglers who are first getting into plugs or first getting into metal lips, that's a little bit of a surprise. It's not just going, wagging its tail. It's actually rolling back and forth.
It's moving on multiple axes.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. That's the scientific term. I love it. You know me, science. Let's bring it in, man. So, so stability is the big thing. So when we're thinking stability, those plugs that are designed to be stable, which means they're able to deal with current, are also generally going to be better in a big surf. So for me, when I'm thinking about a metal lip that's going to do well in a bigger surf, I'm thinking about a metal lip that's going to do well in a lot of current. So something, and this has been popular on and off, but metal lips that are designed for some place like an inlet or the canal will actually also be metal lips that will do really better. I don't know really well, but better in a big surf than something that's designed more for the boulder field or something like that. And to that point, and I'm going to ask you if you agree with me on this or not, I think that using deep diving metal lips that are designed to dive deeper, also can do well in a bigger surf, assuming you can run them slow enough to not make them go dragging through the sand. So I know, for example, more recently, since Dave Anderson created his deep diver, which isn't that old a plug at all, right? It has only been around for, 5 years or something.
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, I guess now it's actually more like 6 or 7 when I think about it. But anyways.
It was in the Go Tight days, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while, actually, now that I say that. But time goes by too fast. Yeah. That plug can actually hold pretty well in a big surf because it's designed to get down and hold in that, it's not designed to just dive down. It's designed to hold. And I think that's just one example. So do you agree with that? Is that what you find?
Yes, certainly. And I was, again, I was trying to think it through, there's 2 to 3 stages of deep diving plug that I'll throw in like the big surf. And I was trying to figure out like, I know what they are in my head, what plug, if I'm looking at the surf. Like if the surf is doing this, okay, I can get away with this one. And if it's a little bigger, I can't do that when I go to the next one. And it's almost like you need a plug that's going to dive down deeper in the water than the height of the wave. So like if you got a 3-foot wave, you know, to like simplify, I'm looking at something I get at least 3 feet down. So I've got, that's why the surface plugs are out, the surface metal lips stay home. But like Jay makes he runs off the old Musso torpedo body. So he makes a surface version. Okay, that's out the game. But then he makes a mid diver, which is pine, slightly different lip, different weighting. So it'll get down like, you can crawl it on the surface. You might be able to crank it down to 5 or 6 feet if you tune it. So that, in a light to moderate building surf, that one's great. But then if you start getting those 3s, 4s, some bigger, the crosswind, like real storm situation, I'm using the same body shape that Jay makes, but it's out of maple. Now that thing gets down. It casts, it holds, it's stable. It doesn't get like blindly tossed around and everything. It just holds its own. And again, now it's below the hectic craziness of the top, and it's swimming in that easier water where like those big stripers we're looking for are also able to hold. And they're looking up, I'm theorizing, waiting for, that bunker to get, tossed around, or a blackfish getting knocked out of its rocks, or whatever that prey might be in that location. They're kind of assuming, again, I'm putting my mind into what the fish is thinking. They're able to sit in that ambush section so I can get down into it, so they don't even have to really exit the safety of that area. And that is where I'm thinking with, and there's a lot of plugs other than what Jay makes that'll do that, but that's sort of the level of what I'm thinking. As it's getting bigger, I'm trying to get a little deeper and out of that melee into a more fishable stretch of water with those plugs.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy tip right there. That's a pretty serious thing. To point out that you're trying to get just underneath, even though the striper is not afraid of the melee, in terms of the presentation, and maybe also a natural sort of reaction of the bait to get out of that and skim underneath it, may trigger the fish to hit when they wouldn't otherwise. You brought up two things, actually, I think that are also really important. The first is that because some of these deeper diving plugs are designed to be a little heavier, they're weighted a little bit heavier, though that's not always necessarily true. It's about the design and the lip and all that stuff. They're generally heavier. They cast, and casting well can be really important because it's not just about getting out. It's about getting out without a ton of slack. And so if you can cast it really well, snub it, run your finger over the line as it's going out, etc., you can stay tight to it. And I think some of these metal lips that are designed to dig a little deeper, both by their weight and their shape of the design, they tend to cast a little bit. And that can help you. So maybe you could hold with a different plug that wasn't designed to do that, but now but you can't get it out there. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that when, and I know you want to jump in. Hold on. So the other thing I want to mention is that these metal lips, because of their bodies being so large, they're doubly affected by big waves. So even something that's very stable in a ripping current, if you can't get underneath that wave, it's going to tumble it because there's so much mass, there's so much volume there too. So that's another thing to consider. All right, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Well, it's just it was just expanding a little on. So you take that plug that you can cast out, you come tight, you can get it initially. It's not just in the first 3 feet of the retrieve; it's the whole retrieve. Because like you think of a heavy needlefish, you can bomb it out, you can come tight right away. If you got crosswind and wave, you start to lose contact with it sometimes. So they might not, at certain levels of the surf, be as effective because now you're losing that contact. And while they might still provide an attractive, opportunity for the striped bass to feed, you might totally miss it. Like I know that's happened to me where I'm fishing like that heavy needle and it's getting thrown around and I'm like, I lose track of it and I lose the feel and all of a sudden, it's there, and I missed it. But with the metal lip, like that's one of the things I love about that metal lip is when they hit that thing, granted you can have a soft hit, but when they hit it and they want to kill that thing, oh my God, I've been knocked off of rocks before by it. And like that's even more so in that big surf conditions. I think it's like that they see the opportunity, they know they got to jump quick. So maybe they're hitting it a little harder because it's such a quick motion. They got to grab it and then get back to the safety of their ambush point. And they know if they don't act as quick, it might be gone and they'll miss that feeding opportunity. And they, maybe another one will come along, but they instinctively have to know that any loss of an opportunity to feed is a negative on their overall survival.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. I think we should do a podcast on what and how hard a plug is getting hit, like what it could tell you about the behavior, and then how do you choose a plug subsequently. So I'll leave my comments out about what I think also could be happening, because I agree with you, but I think there's other things as well. But what I want to say about the needlefish idea that you were just saying, when you're not connected and then all of a sudden you feel that strong pull, I know you know this, I'm explaining to the audience, that fish has probably been on. So you missed the hit, and now you're getting that subsequent pull, turn, whatever. So even if you're like, man, they're hitting really hard, why am I missing them? Even with slack, like I'm getting hits, like blah, blah, blah. It could be because you're actually missing the hit and you're just feeling the weight. You're feeling that turn. You're feeling the beginning of the first run. You're screwed at that point. So the other thing that's beautiful about metal lips, which is what people love about swimmers, but for some reason they don't carry over to metal lips, they become scared of them because maybe they're expensive, maybe because they're heavy to cast. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But in a heavy surf, sometimes feedback can be really important. And with a metal lip, it's hard to, at least for me, it's hard to misunderstand if it's working or not. If it's working, you can feel it. I mean, and I don't even necessarily mean like it's banging hard on the end of the rod, but you can really tell if it's pulling. And I think that's the thing that guys love about the bottle plug too in these situations where there's a lot of rough water. Now, of course, maybe we'll do a whole thing on bottle plugs too. Another plug that's wonderful in heavy surf, but not just for the heavy surf, but that's another discussion. But, that gives a lot of feedback. So I think sometimes I will reach for a metal lip in rough conditions and other conditions when I really want to know if I'm delivering and staying in a zone, or if my whatever is getting washed away. If I want to sort of get a baseline, I'll throw a metal lip out so I can connect, dig, maybe get some feedback from the fish, maybe not, whatever. But being able to stay connected and getting the feedback from a metal lip can be really useful. Really useful.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can feel on like if you're using the right metal lip in that situation, how much you can feel. Like I'm sure you've had the tiniest little piece of weed catch on the hook, and you can feel the difference.
Yeah, right.
And I'll crank it in, and I'm like, how the heck did I know that this 1.5-inch piece of mung or little piece of green weed was on there? And it, then it gets amplified as the current and the waves and everything else. But it is amazing on the metal lip just how much you can tell that. Like a needlefish, you can kind of sometimes maybe feel. But I've cranked the needlefish in so many times. I'm like, damn it, I got weed on here. I pick it up. I'm like, oh man, it was perfect. Like it couldn't have just fallen off because it happens too many times.
Yeah, or even worse, I'll be, in those situations where you've got a crosswind, which is even worse, I think, sometimes in the rough surf. You got a crosswind and you're like, all right, I'm in it. It's working. Like, okay, I really can feel the needle. It's like really like, okay, all right, I finally got to figure it out. And you pull it in and it's like, it's all tumbled and like twisted up in your leader. Which is like, why you can feel it.
Right? And then I'm thinking, that's always the time too when I'm like, that's when the 60 looked at it and said, nah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like so many 60, 70, 80 pound fish have looked at my plugs when they were fouled and they never look at them when they're clean.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, man, I'm really connected. All right, I got it. Yeah. I'm figuring it out. Man, I'm really in it now. And it comes in and the front hook is like through the tactical angle or clip and it's like twisted it up. Oh. Yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. So I gotta tell a quick story though. All this just being said about the surface not being good in a rough surf and staying away from the Danny. Long Island fishing, LI Fishing in VT John, which some people may know and some people may not. A well-known Cape guy in my circles, beloved. He passed away a couple of years ago. Much too soon. He was fairly young. He made a lot of different plugs, and he was definitely a scholar of the surf, and he will be missed on this podcast, frankly, because we would love to have talked to him. Mm-hmm. I did not know him well, and honestly, I had just gotten to know him maybe a year before he passed away. But he once told me a story where we were talking about fishing into the wind. And he said, we were talking about bucktails and needlefish, and because he was a big needlefish guy and whatever. And he told me, though, because we were talking about a specific spot, which, of course, I'm not going to tell you. It's actually in Australia. So just so you know, that's actually where it is. No, I'm just joking. And he was saying, though, because we were talking, I said, it really is a spot that needs wind, but it can get to be too much. And then it's impossible with a heavy super strike or even a tin or a bucktail to keep it in the water, because you get crosswind, you can get heavy wind right in your face, you can get heavy current. And he's like, yeah, but you know what, Jerry? I'm going to tell you, one of the best nights I ever had in my entire career on the surf is I went to that spot and the wind was blowing 40. And he said, I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to fish. And he said, the heaviest thing I had was a surface metal lip. And he said, I threw it out with all of my power. And he's like, I don't think I was getting behind the first wave, but that thing would touch the water. I would take one crank and I would be in. And he said, and these were all 30-pound fish. And he said, it was one of the best nights he's ever had. He said, I've not been able to repeat it. And he's like, and I've gone there and it's, there's been times where it hasn't been, good even with traditional stuff. He said, but I'm telling you, if it's really big conditions and you're like, it's too big and whatever, he's like, consider it. Take a Danny and just try to put it in the water. Like, just get it in the water and you might be surprised. And man, that really had an impact on me. And I've really thought about it. And most nights now on the Cape, I will have something like the traditional 2.5 ounce or 3 ounce Danny or a Goo Goo Eye or something in that pikey in a mode that works on the surface, even when it's nights when, otherwise I might be throwing a super strike or even a heavy super strike. So that's a story that really made an impact on me when it comes to metal lips and the heavy surf.
This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast and find more episodes at surfcastpodcast.com. And be sure to check us out on social media at the Surfcast Podcast.